At my cousin's engagement party, my parents stood by the bar laughing about my imaginary fiancé. I didn't flinch. I raised my glass quietly and waited until the sound of helicopter rotors rolled in from above, and he stepped through the doors like a twist no one saw coming. "Sorry I'm late," he smiled. "Took a while to park the chopper. We just flew in from Dubai." My name is Isla Menon. I'm 34. Grew up in a traditional South Asian American family in Palo Alto, California, where every life was meant to follow a template. Top-tier college, Stanford or nothing. Medical school if you're ambitious, marriage by 28 if you're not. 2 kids, 3-bedroom house, and weekend dinners judged by how many homemade chutneys you served. I detoured hard at 21, the moment I chose design over biology. That was my first strike. Strike 2 came when I left grad school to take a creative director role with a German agency in Berlin. My parents, Nalin and Mira, were horrified. To them, freelancing meant jobless, and remote consulting sounded like wasting your degree on Pinterest boards. Every phone call turned into a performance, me defending my choices, them asking why I didn't just come home and be normal. But nothing pushed us further apart than the day I told them I was engaged and that they wouldn't be meeting him yet. They'd always distrusted my dating life. I never introduced anyone who wasn't serious, and I'd made the mistake of dating outside our cultural circle more than once. So when I met Kian, an aviation consultant splitting his time between Sweden and Qatar, I waited nearly a year to say a word. When I finally told them, my mother's first words were, "Are you sure he even exists?" It might have been funny if she hadn't fast-forward to last December. My cousin Nisha was getting engaged to the perfect match, Harvard-educated cardiologist, fluent in Tamil and tax law. The engagement was a 3-day production at a luxury venue in San Jose. Buffets, choreographed dances, henna artists, live sitar music. The invite wasn't a surprise. The postscript was, "Hope your fiancé makes it this time." Yeah, Kian and I were already in the States for the holidays. He had meetings in Palo Alto, and we'd just landed from Dubai. We'd landed in California from Dubai just 2 days before the party. Kian had a last-minute meeting in Palo Alto the same afternoon as the engagement dinner, but he promised he'd be there by nightfall. His travel arrangements? Slightly unconventional. He was borrowing a friend's helicopter. It wasn't for show. It was pure efficiency. Bay Area traffic during holiday events was chaos, and with back-to-back meetings and parties, the sky was the fastest way between it all. So I arrived at the venue alone. The moment I stepped into the grand ballroom, it began. The usual whispers, the brittle smiles, the intrusive questions disguised as concern. "Still in Doha, your fiancé? Have you considered freezing your eggs yet? We just worry, Isla, you're so free-spirited." Yeah, and I smiled through it all, biting the inside of my cheek, posing for selfies with Nisha, doing my best to be the supportive cousin. But the damage was already seeping in. As I passed the cocktail bar, I heard my mother's voice float above the din. She was standing with her sister, Nisha's mom, and a handful of aunties, drink in hand, voice laced with mockery. "I stopped asking," she said. "She says he works in aviation. What does that even mean? Flight attendant?" She never shows photos. I told Nalin maybe he's imaginary. They erupted in laughter. Not small chuckles, but wide-mouthed, belly-deep laughter. The kind that sticks. I stood a few feet away, my glass of sparkling water trembling in my hand. I should have walked off. Instead, I stood still, letting it all hit me like sleet. Cold, bitter, and expected. There was nothing left to say. Not to them. Dinner passed, and then came the toasts. Nisha's friends spoke. Her fiancé's cousins took turns. Even my younger brother Neil, who hadn't returned my text in 6 months, spoke about love and finding your person. Then the planner turned to me. "Would you like to say a few words?" I nodded. Wearing a wine-colored silk sari, my hair pinned up, gold jewelry minimal but deliberate, I took the mic. "I'll keep it short," I said, eyes scanning a crowd that had never believed in me. It's beautiful to witness 2 people who are supported, celebrated, and trusted. Not everyone gets that. So if you do, hold on to it." Scattered applause. Then, the room buzzed with polite chatter, the weight of their earlier laughter still hanging in the air like a challenge I'd yet to answer. A low rumble, faint at first, then unmistakable. The sound of helicopter rotors hummed through the walls of the grand ballroom. Murmurs rippled across the room like a wave. Guests craned their necks toward the windows. Nisha's brow furrowed in confusion, and the event planner hurried toward the entrance, whispering into her headset. My mother, still mid-laugh at the bar with Aunt Syra, froze, her glass hovering near her lips. The doors opened, and Kian stepped through like he'd walked out of another world. Sleek navy suit, open collar, his windswept hair catching the chandelier light like a halo. Every head turned. A few jaws dropped. Someone, I swear, gasped audibly, while an uncle near the buffet dropped his samosa mid-bite. "Sorry I'm late," he said with a grin that could melt steel. Took a while to park the chopper. The room stilled, as if time itself had paused to recalibrate. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing like he was sizing up a rival at a board meeting. Aunt Syra blinked rapidly, her expression caught somewhere between shock and a desperate need to rearrange her face into something more composed. Kian walked straight to me, like I was the only person in that glittering, judgmental sea of faces, and pressed a soft kiss to my forehead. "Did I miss your toast?" he asked, his voice low, meant just for me. "No," I whispered, heart pounding, a quiet triumph swelling in my chest as years of doubt melted away in that single, undeniable moment. "You're right on time." Kian turned to my mother, still frozen at the bar. "Mira, Auntie," he said with a warm nod. "It's nice to finally meet you." Her glass trembled slightly as she managed a tight-lipped, "Hello?" Her earlier smirk replaced by a flicker of unease. Everything shifted in that moment. I didn't need to look around to feel it. The temperature of the room changed. The skeptical glances, the smug whispers, the pity masked as concern, they all evaporated, replaced by a buzzing curiosity. I was no longer the eccentric daughter, spinning tales to save face. I was the cousin whose partner had just landed from the sky like a plot twist no one saw coming. And while yes, it was a little about the helicopter, mostly it was about presence. About showing up when it mattered. And Kian had done that, in a way no one in that room could ignore. As Kian got swept into a wave of introductions, second cousins, wide-eyed uncles, suddenly fascinated by aviation logistics, I stepped back and let the scene unfold. It felt surreal. For years, I'd walked into rooms like this, bracing for invisible bruises, judgment disguised as questions, doubt dressed up as concern. But tonight, I wasn't the subject of whispered speculations. Tonight, I was the storm that changed the weather. Neil, my younger cousin, the same one who'd delivered a smug little speech about love earlier, drifted over during dessert. He eyed Kian across the room, then looked at me with a crooked grin. "So, that's your guy?" I met his look without flinching. "Yeah, that's Kian." He chuckled lightly, watching as Kian leaned in to explain something to our great-uncle in broken Hindi. "Didn't think he was real, honestly." "Yeah," I said. "A lot of people didn't." And he paused, maybe debating whether to apologize or deflect with a joke. I didn't give him the chance. I turned and walked toward Nisha instead. She met me halfway and squeezed my hand. She was radiant, grounded as ever, not the least bit shaken by Kian's dramatic entrance. "Best moment of the night," she whispered. "I wasn't trying to steal your thunder," I said earnestly. "You didn't," she replied. "You just reclaimed yours. It was about damn time." Later that evening, as the crowd began thinning and valets started lining up cars outside, my mother approached me near the marble staircase. Her face looked softer, confused almost. "Why didn't you tell us he was coming?" she asked. I gave a half shrug. "Would it have made any difference?" She hesitated. I didn't realize." "What didn't you realize?" Her eyes dropped to her hands. When she looked up, her voice was smaller. "That he was this serious." And there it was. the weight of everything unsaid between us. Every time I tried to explain who I was becoming, only to be told I was doing life wrong. That love didn't count unless it was vetted. That success didn't matter unless it looked familiar. But now, she was trying, clumsily, quietly. "I'm glad you came," she said. "Me too," I replied, and I meant it, not for them, for me. Later, on the rooftop garden lit by soft amber lanterns, Kian wrapped his arms around me from behind. "How'd it go?" he murmured. I smiled, watching the skyline shimmer. "Better than I expected. Worse than it should have had to be." "It wasn't a disaster," I said quietly, eyes still on the ceiling. "But it drained me in ways I didn't expect." Kian didn't speak right away, just held me closer. The rooftop was still, the skyline hazy in the distance, the music from below softening into something slow and distant. "They'll catch up eventually," he murmured. "I'm not waiting anymore." "I know," he said, pulling me tighter. We stood there in silence, wrapped in the cool Bay Area air, the kind of stillness that only comes after emotional exhaustion. Down below, the party was winding down in the most predictable way. Tipsy aunties wrapping food in foil, uncles swirling whiskey they wouldn't finish, conversations stretching thin just to delay goodbye. From up there, it all looked like a play I used to star in but no longer auditioned for. We weren't pretending to belong anymore. We'd stepped off the stage. Eventually, we made our way back down. Nisha and her fiancé, Armin, were still glowing on the dance floor, untouched by family politics. When I hugged her goodbye, she held me tighter than usual. "You did great," I whispered. "So did you," she replied with a grin. "You have no idea how satisfying that was to watch." We laughed together, a rare moment of wordless alignment. Armand fist-bumped Kian, who nodded coolly, like he'd done this 100 times before. That was one of the many things I loved about him. He never felt the need to prove himself, even when everyone else expected a performance. As we walked toward the valet line, I felt their eyes on us. My father gave a curt, polite nod. My mother's smile was tight-lipped, almost warm. Almost. And that was enough for now. Not a breakthrough, but a tremor. Something subtle and tectonic. Back at the hotel, I peeled off my deep red sari, wiped the kohl from under my eyes, and collapsed onto the bed with a groan. "That bad?" Kian asked, already half out of his blazer. "Not bad," I said, staring at the ceiling. "Just heavy. You ever walk into a room where everyone pretends you don't exist? Then suddenly they're trying to memorize your resume?" He laughed. "Yeah, most rooms, actually." I smiled. That's why we worked. He understood the things I never had to explain. "Do you regret coming?" he asked after a pause. I sat up, resting on my elbows. "Tonight? No, not even a little." "Not even for a second," I told him. Because the truth is, even with the tension, the offhand jabs, the years of being sidelined and misunderstood, this moment wasn't about proving anything. It was about finally facing what had haunted me for so long. Kian lay beside me, one arm tucked behind his head. "You didn't need me to prove anything," he said softly. "You already did." "Maybe," I murmured. But still, it helped. The days that followed were strangely quiet. There wasn't a dramatic fallout, no teary confrontations, no invitations to dinner or sudden epiphanies, just subtleties, tiny shifts, quiet recalibrations. My father forwarded me a Forbes article about a luxury hospitality project in Lisbon with the note, "Reminded me of something you once described. Interesting read." My mother posted a photo in the family group chat from the engagement party, me and Kian standing near the stage, mid-laugh. The caption read, "Look who finally made it into the family album." It was the first time she'd acknowledged him publicly. Aunt Sarah, the one who laughed the loudest at the imaginary fiancé joke, sent me a Facebook friend request. She even liked 3 of my old travel photos from Istanbul and Dubrovnik. I couldn't decide if it was guilt, curiosity, or both. Then Neil texted. Neil, hey, sorry if I've been a jerk. That was impressive. Me, not sure if that's an apology or a TED Talk intro. Neil, let's go with both. I didn't respond right away, but I saw it for what it was. An olive branch wrapped in typical older cousin sarcasm. A few days later, I drove to San Mateo to pick up some things my mother said she'd packed for me. A few pieces of old jewelry, a shawl that had belonged to my grandmother, and a pressure cooker she insisted was too premium to ship to Dubai. Keon waited in the car, scrolling through emails while I stepped inside. The house still smelled like incense and coriander. Everything looked the same, except the hallway. The gallery of family portraits had been updated. Beside the usual photos of weddings and graduations, there was a new frame. Keon and me, smiling, arms around each other at the engagement party. I stopped. Did you print this? I asked as my mom entered the hall. She looked at the photo, then at me. Nisha sent it. I liked it. It's a nice picture. It is, I said. She adjusted a vase on the console, though it didn't need adjusting. Then finally, quietly, I may have misjudged. He seems thoughtful. I wasn't sure how to respond. It wasn't an apology, not quite, but it was the closest we'd ever come. My voice stayed level as I said, I never needed you to be impressed. I just needed you to stop assuming I was lying. For once, she didn't argue. You've always done things differently, my mother said after a moment. That's hard for us to understand. But maybe different doesn't mean wrong. It wasn't resolution, but it was a fracture in the wall, just enough light to see that maybe, eventually, it could break wider. I took the box she handed me. Old jewelry, a shawl, and a pressure cooker wrapped in cloth, like a sacred object. I gave her a brief hug. Not tight, not awkward, just enough. And I left before either of us could ruin it by saying too much. Back in the car, Keon looked up from his phone. You okay? I nodded. Yeah. He didn't ask more. That's part of why I love him. He knows when silence is the loudest kind of peace. A few days later, we flew home to Dubai. I didn't realize how much emotional weight I'd been carrying until I stepped off that plane and felt the warm desert air hit my face. The city was buzzing, sharp, unapologetically alive. So unlike the careful, quiet version of myself I always reverted to back home. We didn't talk about the engagement weekend. We didn't need to. It had done what it was supposed to do. Now we returned to our rhythm. Late dinners overlooking the Gulf, mornings wrapped in emails and espresso, weekends split between the marina and flight itineraries. But something lingered. Not resentment. Not even a desire for approval anymore. It was the ache of unfinished business. My parents had taken small steps toward acknowledgement, but they still didn't fully understand what I had built or what it had cost. For years, they dismissed me as unstable, unserious. They never imagined I could build something lasting, and honestly, I didn't want them to just come around. I wanted them to witness it, front row, loud, undeniable. So when Keon and I were both invited to speak at a major business summit in Dubai, I saw the opportunity. He'd be presenting on aviation logistics across emerging markets. I was being honored for my branding consultancy, fresh off a 7-figure milestone and a contract with a global luxury group. They wanted a keynote speaker to talk about scaling brands across cultures. I told the summit organizers I'd accept their invitation on one condition, that I could bring 2 guests. They agreed, so I handwrote the invitations and mailed them express to San Mateo. You once asked if I was serious about my life, I wrote. I'd like to show you what serious looks like. No reply, not for 3 days. Then, a text from my mother. We'll be there. When they landed in Dubai, Keon picked them up in our Tesla, not the helicopter. That flex had already served its purpose. He drove them through the city and up to our building overlooking the Palm. Our apartment, a minimalist 3-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows, Moroccan tilework, and an open chef's kitchen, was nothing like what they had pictured. My mother's eyes darted from the sculpted lighting to the art pieces on the wall, trying to take it all in without revealing awe. My father stayed quiet, but I saw it. The shift in his posture, the way he looked just a second too long at the custom bookshelf lined with industry awards. They had imagined something else. A cluttered bohemian shoebox maybe, filled with IKEA remnants and overdue rent. Not this. Not someone who hosted investor dinners on her rooftop and negotiated NDAs with billion-dollar clients between flights to Paris. The next night at the summit, I stood on stage wearing a tailored white pantsuit, hair slicked back, every inch the woman I'd fought to become. I was there to be honored for my branding consultancy, a 7-figure milestone after signing with a global luxury group. Kian was presenting on aviation logistics across emerging markets. But this wasn't about him. This was about me. I spoke about rejection, about being underestimated, about building something real when no one else believed I could. I shared how I turned a small design blog into a global consultancy, securing a contract with a luxury brand that once rejected me. A deal that had the room buzzing with whispers of admiration. I talked about creating my own table when none had a seat for me. And in the front row, my parents sat, their faces a canvas of shifting emotions. My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as if holding herself together. My father, usually so composed, clapped a beat longer than the rest, his expression a mix of pride and something else. Regret, maybe. Afterward, as attendees swarmed the stage, CEOs, venture capitalists, even a sheikh's cousin, my father stood near me, shaking hands like he belonged there, like he'd always believed in me. My mother approached later, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Thank you for inviting us," she said, her gaze flickering to Kian, then back to me. I didn't realize what you'd built." Kian smiled gently but said nothing, because it wasn't about them anymore. The real revenge wasn't making them jealous. It was making them irrelevant to my success. I didn't need their approval, but it was satisfying, so deeply satisfying, to see the doubt in their eyes replaced by awe. To watch them realize I hadn't just landed on my feet, I had soared. Because the truth is, revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it arrives in first class, in a room you were never meant to be in, holding a mic they never thought you'd earn. When they finally looked at me and saw what I'd built, not chaos, not rebellion, but legacy, I stepped off that stage, didn't look back, and thought, this is what it means to stop waiting for a seat. You build the damn table instead. A few weeks later, my mother called, her first real call in years. "We're proud of you," she said softly, her voice unsteady. I smiled, knowing I no longer needed those words to feel whole. But they were a quiet echo of a battle I'd already won, a bridge we might one day cross together.